Hey, this is Crane, and this is a rep review for Specialist. This is a PvP on Fighting Spirit, and this is actually a game where Specialist won. So instead of looking at how he could have played better to win the game, this is what do you look at in a victorious replay. So there's really two things you want to look for. One is baselines. So when I'm doing build A and my opponent's doing build B, what should supplies look like? What should worker counts look like? What should tech timings look like? That should be something that you build a feeling for what's normal, so that when you look at a replay, you can see, oh, I made too many probes or too few probes, or my tech was late, or whatever. So that's one thing we'll do in this replay. The other thing is to look for openings. So that can be an opening where we could have done more damage to our opponent or killed our opponent, but we didn't see it, so we delayed the game. Or it could be something where we could have lost the game, but our opponent didn't pull the trigger. So in either way, we should be adjusting to either attack our opponent at that appropriate time or defend more appropriately. So first, just going to run through the game at ×8. So both players open up with a 2-gate. They get 3 zealots into a gas. So mirrored builds here. Specialist sends over 3 zealots, gets defended. He brings these zealots home. Both players are going into dragoons. Specialist is making a citadel. Our opponent is going for range. So that's where we deviate. Our opponent gets some zealots in. In theory, that probe saw the citadel and the no range. We have some goon versus goon fights here. Specialist attempts to take their natural. DTs come in and defend a goon push. DTs come over and pressure these dragoons. They get in, get 1 probe. Our opponent comes and pressures our natural, but we barely hold it, while our DT does a lot of damage in their main. And then our opponent decides to go all in. They don't take a natural, they don't remake probes, and we defend it and win the game. So, baselines. To do that, normally you won't have an exactly mirrored build. You would have some deviation or a totally different race, but in this case we're mirrored for the most part. So we would look at, are we exactly on time compared to our opponent? So is this zealot same timing as our opponent's? And it's approximately right. Gateways are approximately the same. Probe counts are the same, supplies are the same, so we're mirrored up to this point, so that's a good metric. We can jump up to about 330. You can take another metric. So we have 3 zealots, our opponent has 3 zealots. Worker counts are close. Our opponent went for another zealot, so that's a little bit of a deviation, but our core timing is faster and our gas count is higher. So this is a good metric for us. We are ahead of our opponent tech-wise. They decided to get a zealot, which delayed things slightly. So that's a good thing to note. And then from here, the builds deviate. So this is a bit of a weird game, so it's not as useful to do baselines from here. But if this was a more normal game, you would totally continue for the rest of the game. Look at specific times where things are typically stable in a game that you can look at and compare supplies, etc. But from here, I want to look at openings. So our opponent went for a 2-gate based on the fact that we see 3 zealots here, and our opponent hadn't scouted. If they get a first scout, they can, with a gate gas core build, they can go zealot, core, zealot, zealot, and have these 3 zealots in time. But the fact that they didn't scout until now means that this is almost assuredly a 2-gate. So that's a conclusion we can draw. But we don't know if this is gas or if it's more zealots on the way. So this could be a 4th and 5th zealot already done and 2 more on the way, in theory. So one opening that our opponent has, and they took some advantage of, is this ramp was not blocked. So these zealots were able to get in There was the 4th and the 5th on the way. In theory, there could be 5 right here with 2 more on the way somewhere mid-map. And that would be a problem. That would be very difficult for us to defend. So that's one opening that our opponent had. So my take is that in this situation where we can't see if our opponent's going for extra zealots or gas, instead of chasing the probe with our zealots, just make a wall. And then we're safe from a potential zealot attack. The next thing I want to look at is in regards to this Templar tech. So this gets a little weird and we'll have to go back and forth, but one thing to note, one timing is in PvP when the Templar Archives starts. If our opponent starts the robo at approximately the same time, the observer will be out at the ramp almost exactly when the DT arrives. So that's something whenever we go DT tech, we should look at the timing of the archives versus our opponent's robo. They should start together. In this game, it's about a minute late for our opponent's robo. So when you see this, you should ask, how much damage did I do with the DT, and should I have gotten more done? So we killed 1 probe and 1 or 2 Dragoons. So the question is, why didn't we do more? We should have had a full minute with our DTs in their base. So let's look at what happened and then we can back up. So our DTs come out, our opponent is pressuring us with these 4 Dragoons. We make the decision to defend. Obviously we have to push down the ramp first, but we keep 1 Templar on the ramp and we send 1 to kill this Dragoon. That lost 20 seconds, 30 seconds for this Dark Templar that it could have been over here. So when it made it up to this point and killed 1 probe, we would have had another 20 to 30 seconds of killing probes, which would have been massive. So when we have this defense here, I would argue that we can just use 1 Dark Templar to defend and immediately send the other to pressure our opponent. However, I would also then ask, why was his robo late? So our opponent did see the Citadel. They saw no range, so they should assume that DTs are coming and get a robo appropriately. But they didn't. They delayed it. So is there a way that we can see that our opponent has delayed this robo? Is there a way that we know what's going on? So let's find out. We knew before that their gas was approximately correctly timed. We had a little bit more gas than them. So in theory, their gas could be a little bit faster than this. We can see that there were 2, actually let's go back just a little more. We're going to watch when's the earliest that they could have gotten a robotics facility. So right now they've made 2 Dragoons. They don't have enough gas for the robo. They do right now, but that would delay goons. So they don't have enough gas if they make constant Dragoons to make a robo yet. But now, when the goons are about halfway done, they could make a robotics facility. And then when these goons finish, they would have enough gas to make 2 more. So what we can take from this is if our opponent goes for range and makes constant Dragoons, they can have a robotics facility just before these 2 Dragoons start. At least in this rep. Maybe this is slightly off, but in this replay that's a good conclusion to draw. So they could be starting a robo a little bit before now. So a little bit before now they could have one. So my conclusion here is our opponent doing a normal build where they get Dragoons, they get Dragoon range and constant Dragoons, can defend this DT rush. So I would argue this is not a particularly good decision as a follow-up for 2-gate versus 2-gate. That being said, our opponent didn't even scout it and didn't get the robo up on time. So maybe our opponent will make a mistake, but that's not a good plan. So especially when our opponent sees this Citadel, I would not go for DTs. I would audible into something else. More Dragoons, get range, robo, something other than this. So that's one opening that we had but then we follow up and we see that we didn't really have that opening in a theoretically correct game. So that's something to take. The next opening that I want to look at is when our opponent counterattacks the natural here. So we decide to cannon up and take our natural while our DTs are being aggressive. We barely hold this. So this hold actually requires us to pull probes and fight with them, and we just barely make it. So what we're going to have is we're going to have 7 Dragoons with an Observer, with 2 Zealots and another Dragoon close behind, versus 4 Cannons and a DT. So I would argue that this should be a easy win for our opponent with decent micro. So 5 Dragoons, 2 shots a cannon. So the correct play from our opponent would be to wait for these 2 Zealots and this other Dragoon. These 2 Zealots go forward to take the first shots. We take 5 Dragoons and target fire a cannon. The other units, the 2 Zealots and 3 Dragoons, will just attack move. So we'll take 5 Dragoons, we'll 2-shot this cannon, 2-shot this cannon. By that time, our other units kill this cannon. And then it's 1 cannon, 2 coming in, and a DT versus basically all of this. That's an easy win from there for our opponent. So I would argue that we are not safe to take this Nexus with these cannons as timed. If these 2 additional cannons were up 10 seconds ago, then I think we would be safe. But against a opponent who is ready for this, I think that this is an unsafe Nexus, and we could have just lost the game right here. So that's an opening for our opponent. So we need to remember we need to have faster cannons or some other way to defend or not take the Nexus. So that's another thing that we can learn from this one game. But we got a DT in the main and won anyway. So that's how I would approach looking at a game that I've won, a replay that I've won, to see baselines and any openings that could have come on either side.